Hi everyone. So we had a little bit of a discussion in group about PTSD and the signs and the symptoms of that, and a lot of you commented, and a lot of you have already been diagnosed with that. Some of you are still having treatment or waiting for treatment, and others of you said that you'd tried and it hadn't worked out. And some of you recognised yourselves in it and have never thought of getting treatment. So I just thought that we'd talk a little bit more about some of the feelings and experiences that we can have and how they kind of develop. So I use a particular sort of psychotherapy method as well, alongside the spiritual stuff that I do. I found personally for me, using the two was the lucky charm. It was the thing that worked for me, and that is why I chose this as my career. It's why I chose not to just do psychotherapy on its own, um, and not just to do spirituality on its own, because it really was the merging of the two that helped me personally. And I figured there must be a lot of others out there that feel the same. So I want to talk to you today about some of the ideas behind the psychotherapy that I use, because it might help you sort of unravel and see where certain things in your own life have come from. And so I'm going to talk to you about what we call racket feelings. And what they are is feelings that are familiar, feelings that are kind of a substitute for the real feeling, because subconsciously we don't want to go and identify what the real feeling is because of what it's associated to. So racket feelings are things like I'm depressed, I feel guilty, I feel helpless, I feel anxious, I feel worried, jealous, lonely. All those are racket feelings. They're familiar. They're things that often we've grown up with due to childhood messages that we've received from, it can be society, it can be friendships, school, parents, or a mixture of all of those really. But they don't do anything towards solving the problem. And if we stay in those feelings, that is where we get the feeling that we're stuck. And with PTSD, particularly, that's often quite a common thing. It's not that the feelings aren't real. It's not that you're not genuinely feeling depressed, but quite often, if we take depression as an example, we become chronically depressed about everything. Everything's just against us. Everything's terrible. Everything's bleak. It's a vast feeling, um, and quite often behind that is something that we're hiding from. So possibly the real feeling. When we talk about authentic feelings in the psychotherapy that I use, we're talking about glad, sad, mad, and scared, and they're the authentic feelings. So quite often, if we consciously do it, we can come down from say anxiousness to, right, okay, what I'm really scared of is, and quite often that might be rejection, or it might be making a fool of yourself, or things like that. If it's depression, quite often we come down and we're sad. We're sad because we were let down, or XYZ happened, but we avoid going there subconsciously because we know it hurts, and who likes pain? Okay, so the racket feelings are kind of feelings that we formed in childhood as a way of survival, and we don't need to carry them on anymore if we can consciously choose not to do that. Um, so yeah, they're the racket feelings, and you may be able to identify yourself in some of them. Now, when we've grown up, um, some of you in the group have grown up with parents that are perhaps borderline personality disorder, or they've got addictions, or there was some sort of abuse, or perhaps they were narcissistic, and obviously that has a major impact on you, on your childhood, and how you form your worldview and your feelings of safety in the world, and where you belong and where you fit in. And quite often people with personality disorders do play games. Now, to an extent, everyone at some point plays games, but there are, in this psychotherapy, we talk about first degree games, second degree games, and third degree games. And in the first degree, we're talking really about, so perhaps it's within a social circle, that could be school, it could be family, whatever. And it's a mild upset as the outcome. So someone is purposely creating an upset. Perhaps they're picking on someone and causing them to feel embarrassment, or that they're not okay just being who they are. So that would be a first degree game. A second degree game, we're moving up a notch now, and we're talking about psychological and emotional abuse. So quite often it's secretive sometimes, especially when it's within families. We're talking things like the golden child and the scapegoat child. So, you know, if you've had narcissistic parents and there's more than one sibling, quite often there is a golden child that can do no wrong. And then there is a scapegoat child where everything wrong with the world gets blamed on that child and is put on that child's shoulders. And it's obvious the damage that can do. But also the golden child ends up quite damaged as well and struggling going through life with relationships, because often they've been given an overinflated sense of who they are, and they can have quite narcissistic tendencies as well sometimes, which obviously doesn't help them in life. And then we move on to the third degree games, which we call for keeps. And this is things like, the game ultimately ends up with damage of some kind, real damage, so physical tissue damage. It could be you end up in court, so a game's being played. A common example here would be a narcissistic ex-spouse that is playing a game for keeps with the children and is taking you to court, trying to sully your name, things like this. Also, ultimately, the morgue. As we know, domestic violence, sadly, often more often than we'd like, ends in somebody getting killed. So these are the types of games that we talk about in the psychotherapy that I use. And you may recognise some of those games having played out in your own life. And obviously that is very much tied in with the racket feelings. So all these games that somebody might be playing will invoke feelings of guilt, depression, anxiousness, hopelessness, and you can get stuck there. If you try to consciously move it down, am I sad? Am I mad? Am I scared? And really, really tap into the feeling that is authentic, the real feeling, what you're really frightened of. And then from that place, you decide what you're going to do about it. This is why quite often it's people go no contact with narcissistic friends, family members, and things like that, because ultimately, and as I've said on another video in here, the studies that have been done scientifically on willing participants that with narcissistic personality disorder, there actually is changes in the brain. And one of the big parts of recovery is learning that you're not going to be able to change that. You're not going to be able to change that. And so you have to either be incredibly strong in knowing who you are and who you are not. So you are not the messages that those people have put onto you, like worthlessness, hopelessness. You're not that. That's a script. Okay? This is another thing that we discuss in the psychology that I use. We all have scripts. Nobody is exempt. You don't have to have had a personality disordered family member to have a script. We all do. And it's influenced by everything. It's influenced from school, peers, family. But obviously, if there's been an abusive parent with a personality disorder, those scripts are quite often very difficult to let go of, because the messages have been so ingrained with abuse, and our memories hang on to that, and we develop sort of their survival methods that have maybe got us through childhood, but they're not serving us now as an adult. And they can be really difficult to let go of, but making them conscious will make it easier for you to work on letting go of those. So some of the script types that we can end up with is an example: I'm loveless. I'm loveless and unlovable. So the way that someone with that script might act subconsciously is pushing everyone away. Don't be close to me. I can't trust you. Um, Everything's just loveless. There's no joy. There's no nothing. And obviously, along with that can come depression and sometimes suicide, self-harm, things like that, self-destructive behaviours because they don't feel any love in their life. But that's a script, and it needn't be that way. It's because the person is acting from all those messages that were put on them by somebody else, which is why in the group I often drum home to you all the importance of figuring out who you are. So knowing your core values, not the values that someone has put on you, not the values that school has told you to have, or parents have told you to have, or perhaps if you were brought up with a very religious family that the church told you to have. These are about your personal core values. What are they? What are they? Know yourself, get to know yourself. It's a beautiful thing, and it is the key to break free of the scripts that they're not you. They're not you, and you don't have to act from them. Okay. Another script that we have is mindlessness. So a complete lack of awareness. Um, so, the messages there that somebody might have had growing up is don't think. So you may have come to your parents with thoughts, as children do, as they're learning about the world, and you were shut down, closed down. Parents didn't want to know, or whoever didn't want to know, if you had a really terrible teacher perhaps. So the message was don't think, don't be you, don't express your individuality, just mindlessly go through doing as you're told, don't have an opinion. And in adult life that can look like confusion, chaos, madness, an inability to make decisions for yourself. And that's going to cause major roadblocks to move through life and to achieve your goals. But it's a script, not really you. These are just opinions and messages that you receive growing up that don't represent who you are. And what you now need to do is break the shackles loose and get to know yourself. And if you're staying in contact with people that repeatedly give you these messages, these scripts, quite often when you begin to break away from them, it causes a kind of cognitive dissonance in the people that gave you those messages to begin with, because they're like, whoa, what are you doing? That's not how we play this game. That's not your role. I say this and you're supposed to do this. But when you break free from that, you quite often do come up against resistance from those people. But what you have to do if you're going to stay in contact with those people is tell yourself in your own head, no, that's not true. Okay? So it's not about necessarily being confrontational with those people. It's about being honest with yourself in your heart and in your head and knowing yourself. Okay? Another script is joyless. No spontaneity. They got the message don't feel growing up. So, you maybe went to your parents, teachers, friends, what church, whatever, and wanting to share your feelings. And quite often this is the empaths amongst us, and it makes people uncomfortable. Quite often it's been a societal thing, not necessarily an abusive parent. I know I got this message growing up because society back then, it wasn't touchy-feely society. They found it uncomfortable, you know. So you were told to sort of keep things to yourself. And then, of course, that can make you very introverted going through life. And it feels like it's not okay to share how you feel about something and that you're being too much, that just being you is too much. And it can cause us to reject ourselves. Okay. Another message there would be don't make it. because obviously you're constantly being closed down, told not to be you, that being you is not okay. These are the subconscious messages that you get from being not being opened to somebody, not being open to who you are. And some of the things that can happen there is extreme boredom, addictions, again, depression, anxiousness, because you don't feel it's okay to be you, except it is, because all those feelings are just a script that somebody else gave you that you don't have to be. You don't have to play those games. Okay? So I just sort of wanted to cover some of that, because quite often it's hard to spot the messages that we've gotten growing up because they've been so ingrained. You know, if that's all you've known, it quite often can feel like that is you, but it isn't. So really, my message is get to know yourself, get to know what your values are, what are your wants, your needs, your dreams, your aspirations, without thinking about what somebody might think, what somebody might say. Get to know who you are. That is the key that you need to get out of this box, this PTSD, the depression, the anxiety. Always remember to be authentic feelings, okay, are what is appropriate in the here and now. And sometimes being angry is the appropriate response if somebody is crossing your boundaries. And that is why in the group I never ever say ego is the big bad that you must get rid of, because I actually I find that dangerous rhetoric, especially because I work with vulnerable people. So many times vulnerable people will start soul searching and looking into spirituality because life events have sort of they feel broken and they want to go in search of themselves. And if they come across this rhetoric that ego must be vanquished and got rid of and that it's evil in some way, then they're leaving themselves open for even more abuse. And psychologically, it doesn't make spiritually, sorry, it doesn't make sense anyway, because the ego is in the solar plexus. It's not there by mistake. We need it to live a human life. Okay, we just need it to be balanced. We don't need to destroy it. It helps us, it serves us, it helps us know where we are, where we end and somebody else begins. And if we don't have that, that's when we have people taking advantage of us. Okay, so we don't need to get rid of the ego, we just need it to be balanced. And quite often people with PTSD have got a severely underdeveloped ego because they've been sort of psychologically bashed about so much. So actually, those people need to strengthen their ego, and they need to look at what their personal boundaries are, and they need to learn that it's okay to defend them, and that it's not okay for somebody to disrespect you and your boundaries, and that you are into those sorts of things that occur when someone's stamping all over your boundaries. Well, in the here and now, the right feeling, an authentic feeling for that would be anger. You'd be pissed off, and rightly so. Do you see what I'm saying? Ego's not the big bad. You just need it to be balanced. People with overinflated ego, that's on the narcissist spectrum, and they're the ones that they're the ones that will go stamping all over your boundaries. And so you need to be aware of that, and you need to know that it's okay, even if you've grown up in a family situation where you have had yours trampled on and you've had it drummed into you that it's not okay to feel. You can let that go. That was a script. It's not you, it's not who you are, and you have every right to implement and defend healthy boundaries, and you have every right to be happy. So whenever you're in a situation, think to yourself, well, how am I feeling? How's this making me feel? Is it making me glad? Is it making me sad? Is it making me angry? Or is it making me scared? Identify the authentic feeling and then act accordingly. And you will find that you start moving through life in a much easier way. Okay? We don't want to get stuck up there with the racket feelings of depression, anxiousness, hopelessness, because they're not serving you. They're not serving you to stay there. So drop down and try and identify what the authentic feeling is and deal with it. And that is how we start to move through this. Okay, I hope that makes sense, and I hope it helps some of you. Membership ladies, if this has sort of brought up anything for you, we'll deal with that in the counselling sessions that we have in the membership group, and we can discuss you know, the ins and outs of how some of this is in your life and what that looks like in your life and your personal messages. Okay, all right, have a great day everybody. Bye for now.